Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Psychological Safety, Health, and Wellness in the Age of COVID-19. My name is Gwen Dorsey, and I'm the Graduate Admissions Counselor for the Schools of Divinity, Counseling, and Social Work here at Cairn University. It is my pleasure to introduce our faculty presenter for today's webinar. Kim Jetter is a Cairn graduate, a faculty member in the Department of Counseling and Psychology, and she currently serves as the director of Oasis Counseling Center. She completed her MS in counseling at Cairn University. She is also a licensed professional counselor in Pennsylvania and teaches graduate level courses here at Cairn. Areas of academic and clinical interest include trauma treatment and recovery, emotionally focused therapy, EFT, and other attachment-based therapies in work with individuals, couples, and families. She also maintains a private counseling practice. In today's webinar, Kim will discuss ways to attend to psychological safety, health, and wellness that will be very helpful as we approach the end of a very challenging year and as the holiday season approaches. Before I turn things over to Kim, I want to draw your attention to the Q&A and the chat at the bottom of your screen. Throughout the webinar, you are welcome to submit any questions you have directly for Kim in the Q&A, and we will leave some time at the end to address as many of your questions as we can. Please submit any general questions in the chat and a counselor will respond to them. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to Kim.
Thank you very much, Gwen. I appreciate that introduction and welcome everyone. I'm really excited to have this time with you, and I pray that this will be helpful and useful as you prepare, as we all prepare to go into the holiday season and to round out what has definitely been a challenging year. So before I share my screen, I just wanted to briefly open up in prayer and then we will get started. All right. Heavenly Father, I thank you for each person that you have brought here to participate in this time together. We turn this time over to you and we pray that it would be useful for your purposes. Thank you for all the needs represented here in terms, whether it be with family relationships, friendships, work. I pray that you would impart something that would be useful for each person and for the people in their lives. And thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your provision. Thank you for your love and truth. In Jesus' name, amen. So I'm going to share my screen and then I'm going to kind of dive into the presentation for our time today. Okay. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. So as Gwen mentioned, we're talking about psychological safety, health, and wellness in the age of COVID-19. And just wanted to start off by looking at what is psychological safety. So a definition of psychological safety has been just the shared feeling that it is safe to show one's true self and to take risk in a group. Health in general is the overall state of one's health, and it has frequently been referred to as the absence of disease or infirmity. Wellness, on the other hand, goes a step beyond, and it looks at the active process of maintaining one's health across multiple dimensions. And we'll touch on those a little bit further. And I want you to think for a minute of the prophet Elijah and his experience with the prophets of Baal and Jezebel. The prophet Elijah was healthy. There was no impediments to him being able to carry out what God called him to do. When he was with the prophets, the 400 prophets of Baal, he was in complete physical health. In terms of psychological safety, he was in a place where he could take risks for God, for God's glory. Um, and he was present emotionally in every sense of the word. However, we see a shift and a change when he's threatened by Jezebel and he runs for his life. And again, we see he's healthy. He's able to run and um, gain distance between him and Jezebel and King Ahab. And when he arrives at a place and he just kind of collapses under a tree, he's still healthy, but his wellness has definitely been impacted, right? He is exhausted, he's hungry, you know, he's tired emotionally, he is just spent and drained. And God meets him in that place, seeing where he is, and he offers to him food and drink and encourages him to rest, to maintain, to in order to boost and maintain his experience and sense of wellness. So just kind of keeping that in mind as an example, because he shows us that whole process of going, experiencing all of these three and then moving to a place where his wellness is definitely impacted and his psychological safety is definitely impacted. Okay. So again, just like delving a little bit more into psychological safety, if you're part of a team or a group, can you make mistakes without it being held against you for the long term? Um, are you able to bring up problems and tough issues? Um, are people on your team or group, are they rejected for being different? Is it safe to take a risk? How easy or difficult is it to ask for help? Many think of that as a sign of weakness, but it really is a sign of strength to be able to ask for help. And God invites us to ask him for help consistently and repeatedly. Would anyone on the team deliberately act in ways that undermines the team, group, or a team member's efforts? And when working with team members, are skills and talents valued and utilized? All of these things contribute to an experience of psychological safety. Oops. So, in terms of health and wellness, and I'm going to just kind of touch on this compass, we'll look at it a little bit later as well. Um, Again, that health is a state or a condition of being, whereas wellness is that active process. And we look at wellness across multiple dimensions: spiritually, intellectually and mentally, emotionally, in terms of family and social relationships, our physical health and well-being, our financial health and well-being, vocation, education. You get the idea. And this resource we're going to look at towards the end of our time today, but um, just keep that in mind. Oh, okay. Pardon me. So what can get in the way or impede psychological safety in the age of COVID-19? A lot of it has to do with differing views on how best to respond to pandemic challenges. We all have people in our lives who say there's no need to wear a mask. It's a hoax, or who are upset about wearing a mask. And then there's shutdowns. There's conflicting needs of family members and friends. Think of special events like weddings or baby showers or bridal showers. All of these things, they present opportunities to make decisions that, for the safety of your family and loved ones, that may conflict with how you're making a decision, for example, to not attend a particular event because of concerns about safety, may rub family members and loved ones the wrong way. And that's a challenging place to be in. And it's a risk that can be a little bit scary to take. There's increasing mental health needs, and I'll share some statistics on that a little bit later. And then there's this isolation and loneliness, this kind of pervasive sense of feeling isolated and lonely for many. And then on top of that, we have racial and social injustice that is occurring. And it's, political, economic, educational challenge. It just feels like waves upon waves of challenge. And where's the opportunity to breathe and catch your breath and rest? It's a lot. It has been a lot, and it takes a toll. So, in terms of increasing mental health needs, there's some statistics that I think would be just helpful for us to be mindful of. The Anxiety and Depression Association of America has reported that there are 40 million adults 18 and older who struggle with anxiety this year. There are 15.7 million adults 18 and older who will have a major depressive episode this year. And 2.8 million children and youth ages 16 to 17 will have a depressive episode this year. That's a total of 58.5 million individuals. And that's 35.8% of the US population. So a little bit over a third. That's quite a significant number. And just looking back historically, between 2012 and 2015, depressive symptoms for boys increased by 21%, and it increased by 50% for girls in the same time span. And that was between 2012 and 2015. So just consider, in light of what we're facing this year with COVID, how those numbers, how that looks and how that's exacerbated today. In terms of loneliness and social isolation, that is something like 1/5 of Americans report feeling socially isolated and lonely. And there's medical evidence that the resulting health damage of that feeling socially isolated and lonely is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So we're not talking about secondhand smoke. We're talking about the impact of prolonged and ongoing feelings of isolation and feeling lonely. So there's a cumulative toll to all of this, right? It can leave us feeling hopeless, tired, overwhelmed, inadequate, helpless, exhausted, scared, and unmotivated. Yeah, I think of the words of King Solomon, where he says, I have seen all things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And that can sum up what a lot of people feel, that you're investing energy and it just seems like there isn't places of rest or ways to replenish what has been spent in our day-to-day life and responsibilities. But I wanted to talk about what can help. And one of the things that can help, and it's really important, is just that perpendicular relationship that we have with God, that vertical relationship that defines who we are versus the horizontal relationships with people and those around us that shape who we are. So that spiritual grounding and connection is so key. We need to remember who we are and whose we are. There's a quote that I found so powerful from a couple in ministry named Les and Leslie Parrott. And they said, why is it so hard to embrace the fact that profound personal significance is received and not achieved? And I think sometimes we can really get caught up in being a human doing instead of a human being. Like it is our significance is received and imparted to us through the Imago Dei. It is through Christ that we experience that significance. It's also important for us to remember our purpose. For each and every one of us, our purpose is to serve God. Now, the capacity and how that looks may be very different from each one of us. One of the capacities in which God has called me to serve Him is in counseling and teaching. There's many, many ways in how that looks, but He's called us all to serve Him and be in relationship with Him. We can lose hope during times like this, and that can be really hard. I mean, I remember times in my life where I felt hope waning or feeling hopeless, and just praying and asking God, Lord, please restore my hope. Um, we need to remember where our hope comes from. You know, Philippians 1:3-6 says, I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on until the day of Christ Jesus. And I just love that word remember. You know, even in Revelations, we're reminded to remember our first love. We need to call to remembrance the things that really matter and that ground and settle us in who we are and whose we are. Actually, I'm going to share a brief experience that I had. I may have shared this with some of you before, but when I lived abroad in Taiwan, with a group of students that I was there with, we went snorkeling in kind of the southern part of Taiwan, and there was frequently um, torrential rains, either typhoons or hurricanes, and depending on the season, they could come out of nowhere. Well, I was swimming in the ocean with a group of friends, and there was as we were snorkeling, actually, there was a torrential downpour, and there was this unbelievable undercurrent that was kept pulling us back out further away from our goal of getting to shore. And there was about three of us that banded together and to try and kind of power to shore. But you know, we would swim and invest all of this energy and exert all this effort only to and come up for air to kind of breathe as we were swimming. And there was this torrential, like someone had opened, was just pouring out buckets of water on us. So you're swimming under the water, you come up for air, and it's just more that's poured out on you. And then there was an undertow that, you know, as we looked to try and keep our eye towards the shore, it almost felt like it was being pushed out further and further away. And that's definitely how we can feel during this time where, you know, I remember the day that we got the announcement here at Cairn in March, and you know, we're going to be working from home for 2 weeks and then we'll come back. And I was like, okay, I can do that. I can do 2 weeks of this. And then 2 weeks became a month and 3 months, and it just sometimes feels like, where is the end in sight? And you think about the stress of that, um, and the difference between eustress and distress. And eustress is spelled EUSTRESS. Like eustress is something that you've signed up to do. So, for example, if you decided you were going to do a really intense um, workout plan for, say, 90 days, you prepare and plan for that accordingly, right? You might be hydrating differently and fueling in a way to get all of the nutrients that you need to power up and be ready for this intense physical regimen. You're going to make sure you get enough rest, etc. Same likewise, if you're planning a quick, you know, run to Wawa versus taking a cross country trip to California, you're preparing for that journey in a different way than you're preparing for just going around the corner to Wawa. Well, distress, on the other hand, are things that are thrust upon us that we did not sign up for. And therefore, it can just be that much more overwhelming. And so we really need to remind ourselves of these key things in terms of spiritual grounding and connection, and remembering who we are, our purpose, and where our hope comes from. So, things that can help, and just looking at the dimensions of emotional and social health and well being, paying attention to those emotional cues and practicing the principle of halt when needed. And many of you are familiar with that term because of being hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. You know, whenever these are at work, either all four or parts of them, we are vulnerable to act and react from a place of depletion. And sometimes the things that may come out of our mouth or the choices that we make may not be as pleasing to God as we would like, or as kind and compassionate as we would like. So it's important to say, I'm noticing some things, to check in with yourself and notice what is happening, especially in light of the environment that we're in and the context that we're in. It's also important to allow yourself to grieve losses. You know, there's a lot of things that are different, that are going to be different this year. Already, we've experienced that with Thanksgiving, with limitations and restrictions on where we could travel and who we could be with. And we know that there's much of that for the Christmas holiday coming up as well. And allowing yourself to grieve the things that we miss and that we were looking forward to is so important, because it can open up and create space for what can be. And it just makes me think of what we are told in John 12:24, that unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it can in no wise bear fruit. So we need to give ourselves that space to grieve the things that are not going to be part of our experience as we move into the holidays, and to create room for creativity and finding other ways to be together. And I like to remind us, in terms of social connection, you know, we often talk about social distancing. And I cringe a little bit, because yes, we do need to practice physical distancing for safety's sake. And just to kind of decrease and limit the potential spread of COVID. But that does not mean that we have to socially disconnect from others. And there are still ways to remain connected to the important people in our lives, and to be there for one another in different ways. Some other things that can help is just predictability. I call it practicing the 5 R's. What are some rules and routines or rituals and relationships that are comforting? Especially when you think about children, it's really important to have some measure of predictability where you can. As students, there are practices that can be helpful and comforting to maintain on a consistent basis. You know, finding ways in your life and relationships to incorporate predictability, it promotes a sense of safety. Oops. In terms of emotional and social dynamic dimensions, some other things is just looking at degrees of your emotional health. Again, that checking in with yourself. and kind of monitoring your ability to self-regulate is something that a person said, grading on you in ways that may not have um, before, um, then be aware of what's going on with that. That's a sign of something that's coming up, and how is that moving you? Because our emotions have the word motion in it for a reason. Our emotions can move us to either turn towards another or to turn away from one another. It can move us to turn towards God or away from Him. So we really need to be aware of what's coming up for us and how it's moving us towards or away from. Uh, the having a healthy, realistic sense of your worth and value as imparted to us through Christ, um, your ability to manage toxic stress and traumatic events, your openness to growth and change, and a lot of that has to do with giving yourself space and permission to grieve losses. Having a coherent and integrated life narrative makes a difference. Making sense of your story and and the things that have impacted you, and how does that shape the way you engage and live in relationship with others today. In terms of your physical well-being and health, it is important to pay attention to bodily needs. I think sometimes it's one of the first areas that gets neglected. It's important for us to stay hydrated. And a rule of thumb is to drink water daily at a rate of half your body weight in ounces. So if you weigh 120 pounds, then you want to drink 60 ounces of water a day. Engage in movement. Uh, is the goal is not to make this something that is another task, but just a way to stay active. It could be walking, it could be dancing, raking, home improvement projects, just cleaning out your garage, or not that that sounds like so much fun, but things that keep us engaged and moving, and um, exercising in a healthy way and feeling like we're accomplishing something in that process. Eat more of the kinds of foods that provide sustaining and energizing fuel, and less of the ones that cause you to crash and burn. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of sleep and rest. Um, Sleep is often the first thing that goes when we have busy schedules or lots of competing needs. So the importance of having a sleep regimen is really key. One thing that can be helpful is minimizing blue light an hour before you go to bed, maybe engaging in some light reading, having a plan for how you wind down at night. How do turning down the lights, maybe playing soft music, having something that um, having practices in place that support a healthy sleep routine and regimen. God calls us, He says there's a rest for the people of God, a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And He wants us to enter into that rest. Sometimes we feel guilty, though, about resting. And yet, sometimes resting is the way to move forward in a healthy way. It's not necessarily something that sets us back. So what else can help? There's some various things. I think in relationships, sometimes certain relationships, family members can try our nerves, and so it's important to look beyond the behavior to the need. And we're all adults here, but I mean, if you think about um, caring for a toddler, sometimes they have had a long day, they're tired, they're hungry, and you can see it. It's showing. um, and sometimes what they need in that moment is just to be scooped up and cared for and loved and seen, that they're exhausted and tired and need comfort. How do we do that for others and for ourselves? How do we meet our loved ones, including ourselves, where we are? God calls us to love others as we love ourselves. Acknowledge where you are. Take breaks from social media and the news because it can become really addictive, especially as you watch the statistics and rising numbers and you know reports about hospital beds being maxed. It can be a lot. um, Use grounding techniques. What are some things that help reorient you and help you remain present and tethered where you are, instead of spiraling into places of hopelessness and helplessness? Be willing to connect with appropriate resources and people. And I realize that that looks different now in light of where we are. Um, and yet there's still options and opportunities for that to happen. I think it's important to strengthen protective factors as well. And we'll look at some of the um, kind of what serves as protective factors for us and what as risk factors. Oops. Um, and then again, as far as what else can help, just those overall degrees of self awareness, self understanding, and self compassion, because that allows you to then give that to others. Healthy relational outward behaviors, like using intentionality in your body language and facial expressions and voice tones, your ability to communicate appropriately and sensitively and effectively. Um, Other degrees of relational health, engaging in self nurturing practices and externally practicing relational integrity. And what does a balance of giving and receiving look like in relationships? How attuned are you to your needs and the needs of others around you? So, in terms of protective and risk factors, I like to think of it as a grid, right? So, if you, um, external protective factors are those things in our environment that serve to kind of ground and anchor us. Um, some things we might even take for granted, like access to quality health care, having a loving and supportive family, um, safe and vibrant schools, neighborhoods, um, financial financial resources, um, being a part of a healthy and thriving church, healthy community involvement, presence of safe attachment figures. All of those serve as external protective factors. Now, external risk factors in our environment could be community violence, poverty, domestic abuse, family mental illness. It can be an unhealthy workplace environment, etc. All of those things, um, those are risk factors in our environment. And then looking at internal resiliencies, or basically internal protective factors, those things that um, no one can really take away from you. They belong, they're part of who you are, part of what God has imparted to you. So, our relationship with God, having a sense of humor, intelligence, um, having a flexible attitude about things, are being artistic, musical, having an internal locus of control. And that's a huge one. That's the sense that, okay, I can't control anything that's going on out there, but I can look at how I respond to what's going on. I can look at how I respond to the things coming at me. Rather than pointing the finger out there, how can I respond in a way that honors God and honors my our relationship with God and others? Internal vulnerabilities could be poor hygiene, sleep and nutrition habits, mental illness, emotional volatility, and instability, and having more of an external locus of control, which basically says, I'm behaving like this because you're behaving that way. So the things you reflect the weather or the climate of your environment versus what God has imparted to you. So those are things to be sensitive to um, and to navigate and look, because those can shift. It's not just something that is fixed. Those can change over time, and that's part of the wellness piece of monitoring that and knowing when to um, maybe reduce your exposure to certain things if where possible, and increase exposure to those things that strengthen. So I wanted to just look at brain-based strategies, and this is obviously the figure of a child, but it applies to us as adults. Whenever we are experiencing something and our resources are depleted, you know, we go to our brain, we go to the amygdala, and our first order of need is just to regulate. Trying to reason, if you think about trying to reason with someone when they are triggered or in a state, it's kind of a losing battle. So, some of the things that can help us self regulate, believe it or not, just slowly sipping cool water can be very helpful because it helps to regulate your breathing. When we start to get amped up, our breathing becomes more shallow, and then our brain is less oxygenated. And so we can become more and more tense when we feel it in our body. And so just slowing down and drinking water, going for a walk is huge. And if you can go for a walk with a friend, even better. Stretching, squeezing a stress ball, finding ways to just kind of go low and slow. And then once that occurs, relating, like how do you share, like maybe there's sharing of an experience that relates to where that person is, and they can connect with that. And then after you've kind of gone up that ladder, then you can get to cognitive reasoning. You can't go there first, and that's where you look at how do you transfer skills, what is helpful and help and understanding and increasing understanding and in critical thinking. Um, I use the term SOTAs, which basically stands for it's a critical thinking approach of identifying or looking at describing the situation, looking at the options, all of the options, good, bad, ugly, that are available to us in response to that situation. And then the D is for the disadvantages of each of those options. The A is for the advantages of each of those options. And then the final S stands for, like, okay, so what are some viable solutions based on that process? Um, you've probably worked with teens, or, well, I've worked with teens or young people, and I remember someone saying, you know, what happened between you and that student? And the student saying, I don't know what happened. Her face accidentally bumped into my fist. I thought, okay. There was no regulating or relating or reasoning. It was just that kind of primal brain that reacted in the moment. And it can happen when we're driving. It's we're all prone to that. So I wanted to share a few resources with all of you as we near the end of our time. I showed you the compass earlier. This is from a group called Samaritan Family Wellness. It's a faith-based organization that has uh, just a wonderful range of resources available to families, for adults, for teens, for even for elementary school age, parenting wise, ways to kind of help you assess and monitor how you're caring for um, the things that you're paying attention to and giving care to, and the things that are getting less attention to, and that maybe require some more of your time and attention. It's not about what you're doing right or what you're doing wrong, but like just think about what are the areas in your garden that are being watered and the ones that are not being watered and nourished. So in each of the different, you'll see there's four key quadrants, the heart, and then within that, your experience of relationships, right? So your external experience of relationships has an impact on your internal experience of emotions, and your internal experience of emotions has an impact on your external experience of relationships. So just one example, for each of those quadrants, there's like 10 statements that you would respond to. um, so I'm satisfied with the amount of time I spend with the important people in my life. Or is that something that you're making space for? When I'm feeling emotionally overwhelmed, I turn to others for support and help. That's just kind of in that emotions dimension. Um, in the area of soul or spirituality, I'm a part of a community that enriches my spiritual life. And then the importance of rest and play. Sometimes we forget how important rest and play is. So I'm satisfied with the amount of time that I set aside for healthy fun. Like that's something that is meaningful and helpful. And you can actually go to the Samaritan Family website and complete this online and do it digitally, and it'll just kind of populate the compass for you at the end. So you have kind of this color coded map that would help serve as a guide to developing a wellness plan as you navigate what continues to be trying times. And then I just have, sorry, I looked at some of the other um, dimensions. So just like in terms of resilience, the you're in the area of strength, how you care for your body has an impact on how you respond to stressful situations. And um, neglecting care for your body can impact your stress resilience. So, one of the statements for resilience is I seek support from others rather than isolating myself when I find myself stressed or in a time of transition. And when you think back to that statistic about isolation and loneliness and how, on a prolonged basis, it's like smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Uh, that's really substantial reason to connect rather than to disconnect. Jesus tells us that unless we remain attached to him, we can do nothing. So that connection is really important to God and to others and with others. Care for your body. The daily decisions that I make about what I eat or drink are healthy. I'm not talking about being, overly extreme, but being mindful of healthy eating and drinking practices. Um, Organization, little things like using your calendar to keep track of your commitments can be very helpful in terms of navigating and managing your day to day. I For the last one, I actually pulled it from the teen assessment one because in the adult one, it doesn't talk about social media, but adults struggle with this too. And so that the statement of I'm confident that my use of social media, the internet, and video games has no negative impact on my school or work performance. Um, I think there's many out there who really struggle with that and can find themselves, planning to just check in on their Facebook for 2 minutes and they end up on for hours or whatever social media that you use. I actually made a decision to turn off all of my notifications. So I only see Facebook when I choose to go on it. Oh, I think I'm being told it's time to I think I went over my time. Okay, I just have a couple of slides more on just some additional resources. Um, so just at the very end, the Samaritan Family Wellness website is here. There's also one that's called Spiritual Pathways Assessment and it looks at how we most naturally connect with God. With some of the racial unrest, there's a book called Healing Racial Trauma, The Road to Resilience by Sheila Wise Rowe that I highly recommend. And last but not least, there's two books that I'd recommend. One is Safe People, How to Find Relationships That Are Good for You and Avoid Those That Aren't, and Peter Scazzaro, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And there's also a workbook with that is phenomenal. So thank you for your time. And thank you, Gwen, for your gentle um, nudge.
No problem at all, Kim. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much. That was very good. Now we're going to transition to our Q&A time. And we have, received several questions on the registration form. And so we're going to start out with those. And we just ask that if you have any questions that you want to ask directly to Kim, that you put them in your Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. So the first question here, Kim, is how to efficiently and effectively serve others while dealing with the unrest related to COVID.
Mm. Yeah, that can be tough, especially when you have people in your life who are really vocal about how they feel about um, certain guidelines or protocols in place. And I think it's really important to look at, like, what are the battles that you want to engage, and what are the ones that, okay, the blood of Christ can cover that. How can I respond from a place of helping? I don't have to make this person agree with me, but what is the need, and how do I look past the person to the need and serve in a way that God is calling me to serve? I hope that
Very good. How can we help children who are often physically separated from friends right now?
that is a really tough one. You hear a lot about Zoom play dates, and yet you want to decrease screen time. That is a way, though, for children to connect. Sometimes having those Zoom play dates where possible, being outside um, with and physically distancing, but still being able to spend time with the person um, in safe settings, I think can be really helpful. Um, and then also too, you'd be surprised how, as a parent or caregiver, your presence with that child makes such a difference. How are you um, being intentional about time for board games or reading a book together? Um, Checking in with them about how they're feeling about the changes that are happening. Giving them space, time, and opportunity to feel seen and heard and understood goes a long way.
Hmm. Very good, very good. Next question. Students know they should slow down and rest, but
Yes.
can't due to all their commitments.
Hmm.
How do we encourage rest amidst busyness?
That's a tough one, Gwen.
Yes.
I actually struggle with that one myself at times.
Yeah.
And,
A good question, a very
yeah,
real question.
but
Yes.
what I've gotten around to doing is actually putting time on my calendar that I block out to do nothing.
Mhm.
And I mean it. I block out time that is space if I want to read, go for a walk. I think it's important. Um, I know we have lots of commitments, and yet sometimes the way to navigate them is to take some time out to pause and rest. I
Mhm.
mentioned the book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and there was an
Mhm.
example of it was in the 1800s, and a community was planning to travel across to the west before the snows settled in, and the group had conflict because they were part of the group was afraid that they would not get to their destination before the snow set in. And so one group said, and the other part said, we need to stop and rest and have Sabbath. We
Mm.
need time to rest. So they stopped and had time to worship and rest. And the other half of the group said, oh, well, we'll see you when you get there. I hope you make it there safely. Well, not
Mhm.
only did the group that practiced Sabbath get there before the other group, they got there in a much better state of wellness.
Wow.
The horses got to rest and be, watered and fed. The kids got to play with each other, and families got to connect. Um,
Mm.
and spend meaningful time together. And so when they did go back to work, they had a strength and energy. When they did get back to traveling, they had a strength and energy for the journey. And so
Yes.
rest gives us strength and energy for the journey.
Wow, that's so good, Kim. Wow, a very good example.
Yeah, we can't afford not to.
Right, right. How do we know when it is time to advise a friend or
Mm,
family member to seek medical attention for excessive anxiety?
okay. Yeah, that's a really good question and important to like look at what's unfolding before you, because if you have a friend and you're noticing some significant changes in their behaviors, or um, and that they're to the degree that it is disrupting their daily functioning,
Mm-hmm.
that's when it's time to look at engaging additional supports. Whereas before maybe they were getting up on time and had no problem with getting to class or to their job, and now all of a sudden they're really struggling, and you're seeing there's an impact on their job security as a result, or you're seeing other ways that it's disrupting relationships or responsibilities. Then that's a sign for engaging additional support.
Mm. Okay, okay, very good. How to best support family that live far away?
Hmm.
How do you best support family that live far away?
Yeah, so in the absence of having that personal connection and being present with one
Mm-hmm.
another, what does it look like to just check in with those family members, or
Mm-hmm.
obtain some of their contacts of neighbors um, that maybe would check in, and um, having FaceTime with that family, just writing a letter, um, believe it or not, can be really meaningful for family that's far away. Sending photos, finding
Mm.
other ways to connect, and let them know that you value the connection that you have with them. Is very meaningful.
Very good. How do you distinguish between healthy self-care and unhealthy avoidance of problems?
Hmm. Well, I think kind of going back to what I referenced as far as when a person might need additional support, whether it's counseling or community resources, support groups, is the behavior that's being engaged in helping or hurting, right?
Mm.
Is
Mm-hmm.
is this is the healthy self-care supporting like daily functioning, or is it serving to give a reason to not go to classes, or um, not go to work, um, or to attend to your own like daily needs for eating healthy and um, staying hydrated. I think like what's the fruit, right? God calls us to look at the fruit. So
Right.
what is the fruit of the course that we're taking? And it's like, okay, how is that working for you? You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually getting in the way and impeding your connection with others, and your relationship with God, and um, the things that He's called you to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Interfering and disrupting, or is it helping and supporting?
Mm-hmm.
It
Very
just,
good. Very good.
Mhm.
And we have time for one more question.
Okay.
How can you let go of knowing that your decisions concerning COVID won't make everyone happy?
Oh boy. Well, It's that internal locus of control versus external locus of control.
Yes.
You know, we have to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, and sometimes we have to make hard decisions that others don't agree with. And so, what does it look like to speak the truth in love and say, I know this is really hard for you to hear. And I'd love to be, you know, at the wedding or at this celebration. But I really need to be mindful of, like, for me, I have an 82-year-old mom at home, so I have to
Mm,
be really mindful of that.
yes.
And I have to attend to that. So just being able to prioritize that and to lovingly speak into that. And the person has a choice of how they receive it. You know, I
Mm,
I determine how I express it. The other person is responsible for how they receive it. That is I am content to allow them to experience it and receive it the way that they need to experience and receive it. That's outside of my control. So
very, very good. Very good. Thank you so much, Kim. We are just about out of time for today. Before we leave, I wanted to just thank Kim for a very helpful and very informative presentation. And we just thank you for your time today as well. It's been very, very helpful. We'll be sending each of you a link of today's webinar in a follow-up email. And we encourage you to share it with anyone you think that would benefit from the content. I also want to put a plug in for our Master of Science in Counseling program. Kim is an excellent example of the caliber faculty our counseling students study under. If you would like to learn more about our MSc program or any of our other graduate programs, you can visit our website to learn more or email admissions@cairn.edu or speak to one of our counselors. We're also currently enrolling for Cairn's graduate programs for the spring semester, which starts January the 11th. If you're considering furthering your education or if you're interested in auditing a class, inquire today or email the same email address to connect with one of our counselors. We are so grateful that you were able to be a part of today's webinar. We hope that the time has been very helpful for you, and we look forward to having you join us the next time. Thanks again, and have
thank
a
you.
great